sebagai moderator pada sesi kedua kali ini. Mohon tepuk tangannya.
Baik, terima kasih. Selamat siang semuanya. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me introduce my name. My name is Haikal. I'm one of the member of APROFI. And then today I'm gonna be a moderator for the second session, improving your creative skill set, how to keep pace with the global best practice. So we will discuss with two people that are expert at that area. So I will invite. So is it John here? Yeah, okay. Give the big applause to John Cooper. So here's the production executive of Mad Max. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Have a seat.
I'll go on this side.
Yes. That way. And for the next one is Mira Lesmana. Yay. She's one producer from Indonesia, produced more than 22 titles. And then let's discuss. So thank you for your time, Mira. John, how are you?
Pleasure.
Good, thanks.
Okay, so we will discuss about how to learn from the global film industry to Indonesian film industry. So as we know now, the film industry in Indonesia is expanding from the last 3 years from the government. Previously there is the negative investment leaves, and then but the Jokowi pull it out, and then over the 3 years the number of theater increased over 50%. Now there are more than more than, so there are so many screens now. And then also the film productions increasing over the year, and then the box office, there are a lot of Indonesian film box office. So what do you think about that, Mbak Mira?
I'll go first.
Yes.
Yes, it's true that the last 3 years, I think it's coming into 3 years after 2016, it used to be very, very hard to get capital, especially for the independent film producer to produce their films. But the last 3 years, it's getting easier.
It's still hard.
It's getting easier. And I think especially in this year, there's a lot more production going on. We have maybe 3 to 4 prominent VC companies who are focusing on funding or investing in film. So I think that's why. Of course, they are looking for great portfolios, great pitch, that are basically could bring their money back, so commercial films. And the strangest thing is, actually in the last 3 years, it's getting easier to produce in terms of capital, but it's getting harder to find crew. So this is like following up of what you were talking about earlier. Today, I think most of the producers here would agree with me, right? It's getting very hard to get assistant directors, very, very difficult. Very hard to get line producer and production managers to support us. Actors are also getting very difficult, not to mention writers and especially. So yes, we are actually on that stage where even the associations now are sitting down together and trying to think of a way to actually getting more professionals to help us produce, especially, I think, was it a few months ago we had a workshop especially for assistant directors, for example, right? I think the assistant director are thinking of even putting up a special association so that, yeah, so more or less that's what's happening at the moment, and not to mention, of course, the big production companies who are producing 10 to 25 films a year. They're also, of course, grabbing all those skillful crew.
So the main issue is not enough crew for script writer, director, and etc. So John, what do you think for us? How we face those challenges?
Well, I mean, I want to say it's not unique here. You know, there are many emerging markets where more and more films are being done, whether it's because capital is more available or whether it's because the technology is more accessible. You know, you can make a movie on an iPhone. You know, it's been done. You know, I even heard there was a movie that was done on a backup camera of a car.
Oh,
Yes.
Seriously?
Yeah, I think it was a short film.
Okay.
Very short. But but anyway, the point is, you know, the technology is more accessible, so more people can be filmmakers. And what was you know, a barrier with film and developing and the cost and the cameras and everything, now, you know, it's not so much of a barrier. So so there are more films being made in a lot of places around the world, but there's still a gap. And even in places where there's lots of films being made, there are certain departments that are always lacking. And it's assistant directors, production managers, and a lot of them have gaps in art department or, you know, certain other areas. Because, I mean, technicians, you can kind of retrain if necessary from either rock and roll, you know, theater like technicians and things like that. So I'm not saying they're plentiful, but they tend to be a little bit more accessible. It's those skilled, unique labor kind of positions where, like a prop master, or, you know, I mean, you'll have makeup and hair, but you might not have like a prosthetic designer, you know, or something like that. So those are specialized positions. And I think there are many ways of trying to, I think workshops really help, inviting guests to come, maybe do not just, you know, a one-day thing, but maybe take it into more of a practical kind of workshop, like your assistant director workshop you were talking about. I think a film school, I think either an academy or a film school or some sort of program that is based, you know, here in Jakarta or somewhere in Indonesia, where you can kind of, there are a few aspects of that can be very helpful. One is, and I'm not saying just for writers and directors and camera people, but also for technicians and script supervisors and all of those people. I think some of the best filmmakers have done all of those jobs, you know what I'm saying? So, especially in film school. And I think it's important for every director to have done some of those jobs because they need to appreciate how hard the crew works. It's very, very important. So I think a film school and academy can help because you can bring in guest lecturers, you can have, you know, programs that are specific to what they call upskilling. You know, you can send your students across to other places and learn how they can intern or mentor on another movie. So I think that's a great opportunity, and I think the government hopefully can help with the education and training of these people so that not only are they, it's job training, and it can be something that they can actually go and do in other places in the world and come back to Indonesia and, you know, learn other places and come back. So that's one thing. I'd say the other thing is exchange programs through, whether it's the Producers Association or whether it's through an academy or whether it's through whatever, and just getting out there in the world and seeing how other people do it, because I encourage that for everyone, even Americans, to go to other places and learn how they do it, because everybody does it a little bit differently. It's not an exact science. So I think it's good to have perspective. And then, for instance, in this region, you've got a huge studio up in Malaysia, which does, there's one in Batam, which is I think a great resource. If you can get there and you can just have a program where they learn from the local filmmakers and everything else, but also to get on an international film, maybe like a big Chinese movie that's shooting right now. Pinewood, exactly. And to just spend some time learning, and then come back and share those experiences and those skills, and then having international films come here. And we kind of touched on that in the last thing, but having international films come here, it's very similar to what happens even in the States, where you may be a student in Boston, and a movie comes into Boston, and you get a job on the movie as an intern or a production assistant or an assistant in the office or whatever, and all of a sudden you meet people, and you watch how it works, and you say, oh, I think I want to do this, and then they call it the circus. The circus leaves the town, and then you say, hey, I want to do this, and I learned enough, so I have some skills, so I'm going to go and either work on a film or work on my friend's film or whatever it is. So I think international films is a great opportunity, because you have people that's what they do professionally, yes. And then you have a lot of people working with them. So if the government, one of the ways you can get the international films, of course, is incentives. So if the government can support that with incentives, then I think you get a lot of opportunities for young filmmakers to get attached to those international professionals. I think that's a great way to do it.
Okay, so talking about the international film production, so Mbak Mira, do you have an experience about that?
Well, a few years ago, Michael Mann came over to do Black Hat, and I was lucky to be one of the first to meet him. And there was a few issues, I think, with Indonesia at the moment. At the time, Michael really wanted to shoot in Jakarta, but I think the producer was actually pushing him to shoot in Malaysia instead, because there's a rebate policy, which we don't have. But going direct to the Ministry of Creative Economy at the time, he was finally convinced that he could do it here. But that was one of the first questions that he asked: what do you have in the country? And I think at the time it was difficult, because he wanted to measure how many crew that he could bring over against who he could use in Jakarta. I think at the end it was only production people that would help him, because we didn't really have enough professionals to be, for example, in the lighting department or higher than that. But still, I would say that was indeed a great experience. It was only a week. I think Shanti will be having a Dutch company also coming over. I don't know how it is today, but I think if Michael were coming now, I think we could have sit down a bit more and think about how we could absorb, the skill set that we have.
But I mean, did you learn a lot in that week working with Michael and his?
Yeah, I actually I was with Michael on the first time that he came over to find just to have a look at Jakarta, but I had to shoot. Unfortunately, it was the same time as me shooting another film. So a friend of mine, I gave the name of a friend of mine, which everybody knows, the late Tino Sarunggalo, was helping him then with the production. But I did come over and visit the shoot. Even for that 3 visits, it was just amazing. It was very, very
Yeah, and I promise you, this is not about an American or an American film. It's really about international. It could have been an Australian film, it could have been an English film, it could have been a Bollywood film or a big Chinese film. Any kind of international experience, I think, is really valuable for every filmmaker because it's very much a film world. It's not a film community, it's a community of the world. So I think that's great. I think that, and hopefully more of that happens. And maybe it goes from being a small portion of a movie to being a larger portion of a movie to an entire movie. And I think that's going to help the film industry grow immensely. Oh, also television series.
Okay.
That's the holy grail of training. That's the best because it's not just one movie in, out, gone. It's you are training people week after week, month after month for many months, and that's where you get. And many governments have stepped up. Like for instance, in South Africa, they did a series there quite a few years ago called Black Sails. I don't know if you've seen Black Sails, but it's a pirate kind of thing, and it's on. I think it was on Stars Network. You can find it. But that was a series that they invested in because they knew it would put so many people to work and learning the jobs, and then eventually after the first season, less people from outside would come, more local people would get those jobs. At the third season, it was all South Africans, and it started out a lot of English and Australians and Americans in the first season, less. By the fourth or fifth season, it was all locals, and it wasn't just the technical positions. It was also director of photography and directors and second unit directors and visual effects. They were all so a television series is a great way to train a lot of crew. It takes time, but it's a great way.
So, Mbak Mira, despite the title, do you have other experience for international film co-production? So, because previously only the production level, not the director of photography or another title, another job. Do you have experience that Indonesian people that will be the director or the director of photography for the international movie co-production?
I think there are a few international co-production already happening, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't really, maybe they could share with us, but I don't exactly know who is doing what. I think with Shanti, it's also production services. And it's co-production, but the director will be Dutch.
But the art team is always...
Right, the art director will be Indonesian and so on. So it's which is fantastic, I think.
Yeah, perhaps Mbak Santi next. Do you want to share something with us for that experience? Because we are looking for those experience.
Hello. So we're in the middle of prep right now. So it's technically it's a Dutch film, but the majority of the shoot will be in Indonesia, like 95%.
Oh, cool.
So two top creatives are shared. The costume designer is a shared job between a Belgian costume designer who's the costume designer of Danish girl.
Yeah.
Danish girl. Because it's period piece. And then the art team the whole art team is from Indonesia. There's only one production designer from the Netherlands, and then the rest, the art director is from Indonesia, and the whole art team is from Indonesia.
That's great.
Yeah. So, but there's a lot of.
I intern.
Yeah. But the key with this one is it took 3 years of research and 3 years of location hunting until we're tired. So for anybody who wants to know any nook and cranny in Java, I have it all.
But that sounds actually pretty quick.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes a long time to get films off the ground. I don't need to tell you. It's a labor of love, and you have to really love it, and you have to know how to work hard and be patient.
But I think for Indonesian film, the how do you say, the turnover is quicker.
Yes.
So then for our teams, like, when are we in the shoot? After like 3 location huntings, like 1.5 years, are we shooting? Like, not yet.
I think that's also one issue which I think is very interesting in Indonesia. If you do a preparation for a film more than a year, you're already considered crazy because it's long. So that's also one thing which now is a problem. Now that the capital is also there, they wanted to turn it around even faster, and you cannot even breathe to prep it properly. So I think it needs a professional and a determination to actually say, hey, you know, slow down, at least on the development phase of the script.
But maybe one more thing that I want to address, and it also relates to the crisis of the lack of source of human resources that we're going through is, so because we have to keep up with the international crew, so then we just realized, me and my line producer realized, like, do you know that the whole team productions consist of 6 line producers? So the line producer, and then like every single team production, they're actually line producers of other films. So that's how demanding the production is. So I wish we have more line producers.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's great news, and I can't wait to hear about how that movie goes and see the movie. It sounds fascinating. I'm excited. And it's great because what's going to happen is that movie's going to go out there into the world, and hopefully it goes to a lot of markets, and it goes to competitions and wins awards, and people see it, and then they see, where was this shot? And then all of a sudden, more people come, you know, so the more you shoot, the more people come. And that was one of the things about the government getting behind, in a very big way, getting behind The Hobbit. Now granted, it already had an audience, it's a big title, it's a famous book, it's all those things, but it shows off New Zealand. So people that want to come to Hobbiton can now go to an actual place where you can have second breakfast and get a tour of the set in New Zealand. People go, they line, they queue up. I mean, it's amazing.
Wow, cool.
So, yeah, it's cinematic tourism.
Cinematic tourism. Wow, cool. That's one thing, ya. Pemirsa, also with Belitung, ya, Laskar Pelangi, ADC, this huge impact for the tourism industry. Okay, so you mentioned about the time of production. So I would like to know how long it takes to in the pre-production step, actually, in the international film production, that have you been?
I think it depends. You know, I mean, it depends on the movie, it depends on the script, if it's period, if it's very specific, if it's kind of generic, if it's all inside, and you know, how many locations, and who the actors are. I mean, there's a million.
How about development? How long do you usually?
Well, see, that's the part that I'm not.
I
I used to do a little bit of that, but I'll be honest with you, you know, I found that, I guess like Indonesians, I found that frustrating. So I became what they call a gun for hire. So when you as a producer have your script ready, and you developed it, and you got your cast, and you got your financing, then I come in to help you, you know, figure out the budget and make the movie.
So for extensive.
But development could be 10 years.
Yes.
Easily.
10 years.
Easily.
Wow.
Yeah. Easily.
So we can run out of money.
It's the cheapest case.
That's true, because you don't pay yourself.
You just need patience.
Yeah, you just need to give a lot of blood.
So
Sell your blood.
So you mentioned about the Film Academy before, and then the exchange program. The Film Academy is very limited here. We don't have so much academy, but I think it's growing now. There are a few universities that opening up the film major in the campus, and then as I know, the enthusiasm is there, but still it's not enough to keep up with the industry. So how we just in a year or 2 years we got a fully complicated, fully required crew.
There's a Vivian, you know, she was talking about a possible program. This is a great idea, and they do this all over the world, where a company like Weta Digital, for instance, will partner with an existing university or a program and start almost like a satellite program where they're training and they're doing on-the-job training, and they bring in technicians and everything else. So hopefully more, because that's not like a grant from the Department of Education. That's more of a commercial way of getting training. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So hopefully those kinds of things can help. And then, you know, like I said, I mean, I think the best is really just somehow getting on-the-job experience. Like when I was starting out, I was very fortunate that I happened to live in Los Angeles, but I kind of moved there because I wanted to be in the industry. So it was a, you know, it was a long, like I was thinking about it, you know, for a long time. And then I would just do anything. I would, you know, the first job is always the hardest job to get, and you often have to do it for free, and you have to really love it, and then you have to do a really good job. And then you meet people, and they say, oh, I like this person, I like their job, I like the work that they did, I'm going to bring them on to the next movie, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's also a business of relationships where you get to know other people in the industry, and that can be helped by associations like the Producers Association and other kinds of groups. And then eventually, you know, you have enough, well, hopefully enough to make your own movie or whatever it is. But I mean, that's the process, and it takes a long time. You know, it reminds me of Joko Anwar's history, where he didn't have any resources to go to film school or do anything like that. So he went into journalism, which he thought was kind of like a parallel kind of industry that he could get a job and work in. So as he's writing about films, and then he became a film critic, he got access to filmmakers. And so he started learning the process and learning through that, and then eventually wrote his own screenplay, and now he's directing, and he's working with HBO, and he's a big shot, you know. So it doesn't mean you have to have a film academy. It just really means you have to figure out a way to get experience.
Okay. So you mentioning about the Joko Anwar, and I'm curious, what do you think about the Indonesian films at this moment?
I'll be honest with you, I've only seen a couple, so
okay.
I'm a little bit behind the times. But so far, I mean, it seems to me, first of all, you have an incredible amount of amazing locations, all different kinds too. I mean, people think, oh yeah, Sumatra, you know, like the usual spots, Bali, we know what that looks like because of movies like Eat, Pray, Love, and other things. And that's another one. Like those international movies come and they change the economy of the place they go to. So now there's spas all over Bali because the tourism industry, you know, caught on to the fact that everyone's seen that movie and goes, oh, we're going to Bali and we're going to a spa. Before Eat, Pray, Love, there weren't a lot of spas. But now it's a business, you know, and there's millions of dollars being spent. So it just shows you how powerful it can be and what a great economic benefit it can be too. So, but yeah, I mean.
I think also here, if you're talking about capacity building, especially Film Academy, why I think it's very difficult for us to keep getting ADs or assistant directors are most of them want to become a director, a hotshot director. So it's very hard also to get the career of a producer, you know, like production assistant, line producer, and then producers. The assistant director, if you do have them, are usually those who want to be a film director, and perhaps at the most they will only do 3 times being an assistant director before they move on. I'm lucky because in-house I have an assistant director who thinks that I am an assistant director for life and that's my job, and I'm very proud of it. But we don't have many of that here.
Yeah, no, that is a challenge, and I think that's a challenge everywhere in the world, I'll be honest with you. There are many established filmmaking communities, like, for instance, in South Africa, where you almost always bring in an assistant director, because it's just not a position that, you know, it's not a common passion. It's a very hard job. It's a career path that is like you want to be an assistant director. It's a very hard thing to do, and it takes a very unique person to be successful at it. I mean, another one like is a focus puller. You know what I mean? A focus puller on a camera. Everyone wants to be a director of photography. You know what I mean? But the best focus pullers want to be a great focus puller, and it's a difficult job. It's an important job, and you know, when the industry gets, I think, settled and starts becoming regular, I think you find those people, and they go into those positions, and then they become proud of being the best, you know, assistant director. But it is a challenge everywhere. I'm not saying it's unique here. It's a challenge. So a lot of times you bring people in from other places. You know, you look at where they make a lot more films. Like, for instance, you know, in this region, Thailand makes a lot of films. Obviously, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, who knows? You know, like I said before, if you're putting together a film, I forgot who was asking. This gentleman over here. If you're putting together a film and you can't find the right assistant director, actually it's a woman, who you know, is here in Jakarta, then look outside, you know, and bring them in. I mean, I'm trying to think of examples. I mean, so many times it's such an international crew, and that's okay. It's still an Indonesian movie. If there's ownership, if there's, you know, it's part of the culture and it's for the Indonesian audience, you've got an Indonesian producer and hopefully writer. I mean, the identity of the film is still okay. It just, you know, use the world resources.
Because I had an experience of shooting in New York for a few scenes of a film that we produced in 2016, and the production services that were helping me in New York was giving me 10 CVs of possible ADs, you know, and 10 CVs of possibly production managers. So, of course, for me, that's something like, at the time I thought, oh my God, such luxury, that's true, but I guess I could look at it the other way around, that I could tap those.
That's what I'm saying, is when you get that experience overseas, all of a sudden you have not just experience, but you have contacts. And then those people, you can say, hey, do you want to come down? Like, this is not a bad place to be. I have to be honest with you. Good food, good weather, and you know, beautiful people and beautiful locations. So a lot of people come here on vacation. Right. You can come here and have an experience, and you know, who knows?
So exchange program, eh?
Yes.
So that could be possible if the government will provide it. So
if they provide the visa, that's the other thing.
Oh yeah, that's important.
Because working visa does take a long time.
That's a big. That's definitely a challenge when it comes to making movies.
So I think despite Mbak Mira, there are a lot of producers here have international co-production despite Shanti, perhaps any others producer would like to share with us the experience to be international co-production. Malala? No, just wondering, would you like to share with us, you have the title that working with Fox, so how does it work? Can we just learn from you, Matt?
Hear about
we're sharing now.
your experience. Yeah, sharing. We're sharing.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sheila. So I'm the producer of 212 Warrior. It's a new film just released last August. It's the first co-production with 20th Century Fox. So basically, it's aiming for Indonesia. So all crew and cast are all Indonesian. So it is a 50-50 co-production with Fox, and I think I learned a lot, especially in terms of the legal and also reporting and all that. So yeah, basically it's like that.
Yeah, the big companies require a lot of reporting.
Yeah, the reporting and the legal is really.
Yeah, I know. But I mean, that's a great example of, you learned a lot, and now I would imagine you've got a lot more contacts, a lot more opportunities, and I wish you the best of luck, and I can't wait to see the film.
Thank you. Of course, I mean, co-production, we always encourage people to do co-productions, not only to learn about things, I mean, not only transfer technology and transfer of knowledge, but also expanding the territories, distribution and all that. So it really helps because in Indonesia we have relatively quite small market here. So we need to expand the market, especially in a big budget production.
And I think that's happening. I mean, you've got such great potential here because you've got a big enough population with one language that can that all loves watching movies. I mean, one of the things that and television and all different formats. So the industry can only grow. You know what I mean? As long as you water it a little bit, it'll grow no matter what. And now it's starting to. We're thinking about how do we grow the people, the Indonesian crew and the directors and the writers and that's a super important thing. But you've got such great potential here. I mean, it's so much more fortunate than a lot of other places where you're dealing with 3-4 different languages and lots of different. But you've also got a lot of different stories here. You have incredibly long history and different cultures and different different stories to tell. So, and that's the most important thing. We were, in fact, we were just talking about the fact that Netflix is, coming into a lot of local markets, like for instance Indonesia, which sounds like this big, monster. There is a certain aspect to that, but the good byproduct is that what's happening is the opposite of what you would think a little bit, and I think it's going to happen more and more. On Netflix, there's a Netflix in Germany, and they produced a series called Dark, which is a German television series in German with Germans, 100% German, and it's hugely popular in the United States. Even though it's dubbed in English and it's a German, like when does that happen? It doesn't really happen. But I think it's going to happen more and more. So when Netflix Indonesia comes in and starts doing some local programming, or like Fox comes in and does a co-production, these are films that are for Indonesian audiences that I think are going to find audiences outside of Indonesia, which is very exciting. Very exciting. So the future is bright.
Yeah, there is a lot of OTT players now, like the iFlix, Netflix, Hooks, and there are so many players. Do you think it's gonna be change how we work in the industry, the OTT?
That's a question for you.
I think I see it as a very exciting time. over the phone we spoke about this small screen versus big screen, which I think we should embrace both. But I do agree with you that the discipline of working on a series is not something that most of the producers here are familiar with. Some are actually very, very familiar with working on televisions, but the way the televisions produce their programs here are very different discipline as well. They work in very fast, process. Sometimes they write also very fast. It's almost like it's most of them are soap operas. That's what they're doing on free TV. But of course, we're looking for something more exciting on OTT, on a digital platform. And it is something that I think together we are trying to learn to write it, to produce it, and to actually shoot it. But the demands are very high. I think almost every producers, at least in our association, maybe 50% are already approached by the big players asking for content. But it is something that I think we have to face together. I mean, talking about what you said, how we could actually learn from outside, I personally haven't really thought of resourcing, that, learning about producing, for example, series abroad, wouldn't know how to tap into that. Perhaps you could enlighten us.
I mean, look, maybe, I'm not sure. What I would say is, no matter where you go, I think you can learn something, and even inside your own country, you know what I mean? But one of the things that, and I'm going to turn the question around a little bit, so one of the things that I think I've been able to do well is to go to different places and not, some people from Hollywood will go to a place and say, well, that's not how we do it in Hollywood. And then they end up finding themselves back in Hollywood.
Right.
But I didn't do that. I went out and I said, oh, well, how do you do it here? Whether it was the UK or Australia or South Africa or Georgia in the States or Canada, or, they do it differently everywhere. It's not an exact science. So I think to expose yourself to different ways of doing things just adds to your ability to be flexible and to, and to change. And so I think I always try to consider all of the factors. There's cultural factors, there's economic factors, there's weather factors, there's a million things that go into influencing how to make a film anywhere. And I think we all have to be aware of that. So in terms of I think getting the experience is something that you have to kind of like open your mind to, you know what I mean? And almost like, okay, I'm open to that now. How am I going to make that happen? And you start, emailing people, or maybe you become a judge on a film. Another thing, by the way, is film festivals. That's a great way to mix. So I hope that there's a Jakarta Film Festival.
She just walked out.
I saw that, that's why I brought it up. No, I'm kidding. No, but I mean, that's a great way of supporting your filmmakers, of meeting people, of bringing people in, and while they're in for the film festival, you get a lecture or a workshop out of them. I mean, those are fantastic ways of sharing experience and knowledge and stories and creating contacts outside. I think that's the way to do it.
So we used to have Jakarta International Film Festival. Is Aura still here too? So Shanti, who's co-producing with the Dutch, she was actually the founder of Jakarta International Film Festival. But it stopped in, what year was it? After 10 years, I think it stopped in 2006. 2008, that's right. I think they tried to have another one, but it didn't work out, which is, you're right, during the time that we had Jakarta International Film Festival, it was fantastic because the workshops, the people that were coming in, the Q&A that we have, every films that was shown, people were flocking and we learned so much. So it is a pity that we do not have an international film festival at this time where actually the film industry is growing. But I do have good news. We're actually going to make a film festival, and hopefully in 2020 we will release Bintaro International Film Festival.
Jakarta doesn't have it, Bintaro has it. Wow.
Sorry Jakarta, you all moved to Tangerang now.
The Hollywood of Indonesia.
So we had a good sharing session now, but I think it's time to give the audience a chance to ask the questions. Do you have somebody? Would you like to ask something? Okay.
Jangan malu-malu.
Ayo, siapa yang mau bertanya?
We're all in it together.
Yes.
We're in the same boat.
Yes, in the same boat.
Oke. Bener nih, gak ada yang mau? Oke, silahkan.
Hello, my name is Kina. I think I want to share about what you talked about the lack of human resource. So, like you said, so I'm just graduated from film school. So I want to share what my friends and I are experiencing. Just like you said, the capital is there, and these days there are a lot of platforms that require a lot of contents, and there are a lot of investors that willing to invest in young talents, in young filmmakers. For us to be involved in feature project, it's like a big chance. So what happened is when like some digital commercial product or investor that willing to invest in us, what we think is like it is better for us to start our own small project than to be involved in the bigger project. So because it's the harder process. So that's what happened. Maybe that's where some of young talents are. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting. That was what I was talking about in the last session, which is just do it. You know, I mean, if I understand what you're saying, it's sometimes easier, which is very hard, to do your own project than it is to get a job on some big, you know, international project. And there are so few opportunities, and a lot of people, of course, want to get those jobs. And as you'll realize, like with any business, it's a business of people that you know, because of course you always hire people that you know, and so you need to know a lot of people. But I want to share with you a saying in the States, and you may have heard of it, and it's "fake it till you make it." So, fake it till you make it. I don't mean like, you know, be dishonest. I'm saying you need to put yourself into a position you need to be confident enough and brave enough to put yourself in a position of making something happen. I mean, you've produced some amazing movies, and you have a lot of friends that are filmmakers, and every single one of those people, at some point, they question in their mind, can I do this?
Yeah.
And then, or they get to that point, they're confident, and they get to that point and they go, oh my gosh, what have I done? but that's what I mean by fake it till you make it. I'm not saying fake it, I'm saying be confident and do it, and you will, at the very least, you'll learn something, or many things. Failure is part of success.
If you don't believe in yourself, who will believe it? Yeah. Mamira, do you have something to say?
If you have friends who are interested to be in production, please tell us.
Your email that please.
So true.
The association, I think, will take that information for sure.
Okay. So, any others? Hello. Okay.
My name is Sesi. Maybe I want to ask about incentive, which our country doesn't have about it. And I experienced producing in Prague, and they have like 10 or 20%, and it will become our contingency to production. And it's the first time that they give us the return money, which I never have in here. So how we as a producer, is it possible to push our government to do that, or local government too? Firstly, maybe yours. Yeah, the first one is there, and I think it's the important things also is about location. In this capital city, the location price is very high, and I always like surprised with the prices. It become have no standard, no rate. So location owner can do like, this is my price. You want to take it or leave it?
Yeah.
How you deal with it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's a great question. Two big issues, and I'm sure you have a lot to say too. On the first one, I would say, I think it's, on incentives, look, it's a tricky thing because, government, of course, has a lot of different programs. And I think it's really about educating and being persistent with, your local representatives and the parliament and the MPs. It's something that the Motion Picture Association does help with in terms of talking to the governments around the world about, because the Motion Picture Association is, its headquarters is in America, but it's an international group that wants more filmmaking to be done, and local filmmaking, and more theaters, and more people that love movies. It's really just like, it's a movie lovers, kind of association. So they help governments put into place incentives that work. The last thing you want to do is make an incentive that doesn't work, and people take advantage, and then it's an embarrassment, because that can really hurt the industry. So when governments are looking to implement incentives, I think they hopefully will take into account what the MPA can help with, and that is experience with many other places. There's so many ways of doing incentives. It's finding the one that works for this place. And one of the things that I suggested the other day was, for a government like Indonesia, where it's a pretty big commitment to start talking about a film incentive. That's like a lot of money over a long period of time, and let's be honest, politicians sometimes aren't in office for very long, or if they make a mistake, that could be the reason they aren't in office anymore. So maybe the thing to do is to start with one grant. It's just one piece, one pot of money that you can offer and say, look, there are films circling all over the world that are looking for places to come. And maybe through relationships with filmmakers that you've got, and then the producers and the MPA, we can find a film that's out there that might need these locations, that might be interested in shooting here, and that might, look at this money as a way of making it competitive with a lot of other places. And then you have that one film come through, and we see how it goes, and we make it the best experience possible. And then if it's good, then maybe we talk about how to make that a more regular thing. You know what I'm saying? And and the other part of it is educating government to understand that just, you know, having a film rebate or an incentive is not just writing a check and it goes away. It's actually employing people in Indonesia that are paying taxes, and you know, you're hiring locations, and I'll get to that in a second, and other vendors. You know, I'll never forget when I was doing The Great Gatsby, and you know, there was that big yellow Duesenberg, that the Gatsby car.
Right.
You know, that beautiful. And I would bring the MPs from government, because they invested, you know, quite a bit of money in that movie, and I would bring them through, and we would do a tour of the sets, and I would always bring them to the Duesenberg. And I said, and it's true, over 100 different Australian craftspeople and companies have their fingerprints on this car, because they were all paid to do restoration of this, or to fabricate that, or to fix this, or to do this, or whatever it was. There's so many different parts of that car, which was basically custom made, that, you know, all of those people got paid, and all of those people and all those companies and all those, you know, mechanics and everything else pay taxes. So at the end of the day, now that we have had many countries and other jurisdictions that have incentives, we figured out that by spending $1 of incentive, you actually get $1.08 back in tax. So it's kind of interesting. And again, the Motion Picture Association knows all of those programs and can give you data for that kind of stuff. So if you make an argument to government and say, look, it's actually not really right. Treasury looks at it as writing a check because they only see the budget. But tax revenue comes back the next year and you actually have more money. That's part of it. The other part you were talking about was location. The government can also be very helpful there. Again, by not giving anything away, not spending any money, they can help you by giving things away. So many locations around the world, anything government owned is free. There's no location fee for that location. And that's a great way for government to say, we support the filmmakers, but we don't have to write a check. You know what I mean? So that would be a nice thing, you know, and film permits for free. And, you know, maybe closing a road and police and, you know, that kind of thing, to do a stunt in the middle of, you know, Jakarta on a Sunday afternoon when no one else is there, or the middle of the night, you know, or something like that. But, you know, closing a bridge, those kinds of things, the government can do those things within their budget and still help the filmmaker without writing a check. So that would be my answers to that.
So I guess I think about film incentive for, if you ask how it has been, I think we've been fighting on that issue for the last 20 years. But I think at the same time also, looking at it, at the end you have to show that the industry is actually working and can give something back also. At the end of the day, when your films are successful, at certain places, for example, people will then, or the government, the local government, then will see the benefits of that. So I think, for example, both on Laskar Pelangi and Ada Penangan Cinta that we produced, the tourism went up so high on those two locations, it brings an understanding on some other areas. So I think now, today, there are a local film commission is already happening in some places like Banyuwangi. I think there were seven places in Indonesia that are free if you are to use areas that belongs to or arranged by the government. Even some areas will give you free hotels and free recce, technical recce. So just like in New York. So I think it's growing, and I think at the end, that's what's important. You have to show that the film can work, and that there are mutual benefits to both parties, right? I think that's very important, because I remember back in 2008, maybe, I was invited to Sydney to meet all the film commission around, and they were saying that, I don't know if this is true because you're there for quite some time, they were saying that there was actually a big problem in Australia where all the filmmakers are actually so dependent on incentive and on funding. They don't feel it's necessary to think of the marketing of the film so that it makes it in the cinema. So there's hardly any Australian film made that is successful in the box office. And also the filmmakers are fighting against each other in getting the funding. So if so-and-so get it, the others doesn't. So I don't know if that's still going on, but I remember they were telling me that it's not all great ideas.
Yes, well, that would be, you know, what they call a quality problem, where there's too much funding. A champagne problem, exactly. No, I mean, look, that is, the pendulum can swing that way too. And when you have too much funding, people are fighting over it, they become dependent on it, and you know, it's like social services, it's like anything. If you don't have to get a job, why would you get a job? Why don't I just collect unemployment, you know, like, okay, fine. And that's a problem in the world, you know, so the filmmakers are not immune to that, unfortunately. But I think, you know, that is something that was kind of around that time, and it's interesting how it affected the box office, because these films were being made when they probably weren't ready to be made, or they weren't like really challenging films, or they maybe shouldn't have been made, let me say. And so the Australian audience was going to these films, not every film, just you know, a few of them, but they would go to these films and go, God, Australian films are terrible. And so they stopped watching Australian films. The Australians stopped watching Australian films. That's a big problem. But anyway, that is a very rare and isolated thing, and it was kind of at that time. I think it's really changed now. If you look at Australian films now, like Breath, and I mean, Breath was beautiful, and part of it was actually shot here in Indonesia. A lot of the waves are Indonesian waves, I just want you to know. It's a beautiful movie. If you haven't seen Breath, see it. It's absolutely gorgeous, and very Australian, you know, very, very Australian, but it's also, it plays, you know, you can understand it. I think anyone who plays internationally, so it's beautiful. But you were talking about
the pendulum is going that way.
yeah, the pendulum. But I mean, look, I think you know, there's a lot of different ways of making incentives work, and what I've said many, many times, and I really believe this, is if you don't have an incentive, you're not in the game. You know what I mean? You're not on the playbook. I think if you have an incentive, even if it's small, even if it's something that is almost like a token, you're in the book. You know what I mean? And once you're in the book, once you're in the address book, then the filmmakers come. I don't remember what I was going to say. So I think it's also up to the filmmaker to be resourceful. I think if the government, the state government, or the regional government, or the federal government, you know, maybe they own a building or a business, it's up to you to think, because they're not going to think for you. You have to think for yourself and say, oh, you know, they own that big Air Force base out there, and there's a huge warehouse, and we need a warehouse to make us, you know, kind of a sound stage kind of thing, or whatever it is. It could be a boat, or it could be a research facility, or who knows. You know, you have to be clever, and you have to be resourceful, and you have to kind of make your own luck when it comes to that. So, good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have been struggle.
But again, I'm glad that some of your experience in Prague has, you know, you come back here and you think with a little bit different eyes. Yeah.
Okay, so the third question.
Hi John. Hi. Just responding to a prior question, I've heard so many times this year that we are lacking of crew, production crew and everything. But then on the other side, Mbak Mira said, and maybe other fellow producer, please, if you want to work in film, please let us know. And then meanwhile, there's a question about, I want to work in film. The question is, how are these friends going to find the channel? Is there anyone to contact for our friends who wants to work in the film industry? Mbak Lala, Mbak Mira, or Mbak Leni? Anyone here? Is there any one channel that our friends, film worker who want to work in film? Who should they contact? I think it's probably help. Yeah.
I think definitely the associations, because we have producers association, we have directors association, we have writers associations. Perhaps what's still happening is not all of them aware that there are these associations. That is, for me, I think the easiest. But I think at the moment, through the association as well, we are conducting workshops as well, in the hope that the names can be, we can actually collect all the names that people want to work. In terms of us, the producers at the moment, of course, we tap the film schools, and we tap other producers, if they do have someone. But at the same time, I think it's true that all the young ones now are also already producing and already in production, doing web series, and I think there's a regeneration of and how they work is probably also quite different to how we work. But I think the association is definitely the place where we could exchange needs. And
so you can find out which place that you want to go if you're going to be a director. So APROFI is the right place. I think there are so many associations.
Yeah. Yes, and by the way, assistant directors should really go to the producers association, not the directors association. I think that's the problem. A lot of people think
that is a language that it sounds like you're the director's assistant.
Exactly.
That's a different thing.
And then I was just talking. It's so difficult for me if I visit or got a new crew and they name the department directing department with assistant director being a part of the directing team, and I was like, no, you are the part of the producers team, and that's also a big problem, I think, here, the understanding of what assistant director is, that they're assisting the director and the enemy of the producer.
Now it's interesting because it is a language problem, that it doesn't make sense that the assistant director actually is in the production department.
Right.
But it really is, and I think people need to understand, hopefully, the word gets out, that assistant directors are actually, they're running the set, they're organizing the set, they're communicating with the rest of the set, they're doing all of that, and they're one and the same with production. There's only one director, and the only person in the director's department is
the director.
His or her assistant.
Exactly.
That's it. But that's not an assistant director.
Okay.
That's a personal assistant. That's someone that gets them the Diet Coke.
So the understanding,
Bring him coffee, yes.
Okay, so we're still open for the questions. Anyone? Okay, it's we still have time to discuss, but there's someone. Okay.
The question is for John and Mbak Mira. What is, in your opinion, what is the most successful film that you did and why? Thanks.
Wow.
They're like children. They're all different.
It's almost the same question when you ask which ones of the films that you produce that you really like. They're like children, one by one. But I guess I could maybe say one film that is very special for me, which I produced in 2004, and that was Gi, because it was the first big production that I've ever done, and it consists of bringing in a lot of extras. It was periodic as well, 1960s, and it also demanded the production to go up of the highest mountain in Java with all the equipment going up. So I think it was the most special film for me because I learned a lot from that production, Gi, in 2004. 2003, 2004.
Can't wait to see it.
It's on Netflix.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Worldwide.
I saw the advertisement.
It's not all bad, right? Now, I can have access to these wonderful films. Look, it's hard to say. There were films in my early career that I really loved the process of, and I was very proud of because, again, sometimes you don't think you can do it. Well, often you don't think you can do it. I want to say that more often than not, you think it's not possible, and yet you go on and you do it. So don't think that you can't do it. It's everybody has that. Just cover it up well. Hide it.
Fake it.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. Story of my life. No, I'm kidding. But I think recently the film that I'm most proud of is, and it's for a lot of different reasons. And there's a lot to be proud of. Of course, I've been very fortunate. But it was The Last Face. It was that movie that Sean Penn directed. It was a movie that was incredibly difficult to do. It had different time periods. It was very physical. We were on very distant locations. There was a lot of traveling. Logistically, it was so hard to put all the pieces together. And I had a very demanding director who doesn't like to hear no. Ever, and I had a limited budget. It was not a big budget movie. I mean, it was pretty big, but it wasn't like it was. You'd be surprised, believe me. And there were some locations where we had to go into the desert, and we were 2.5 hours from the nearest village, let alone city. We were like a 2-hour plane ride from the nearest city. It was like, so we had to sleep in tented camps. So we had 200 people in tents in the middle of the desert, sleeping during the day because we were shooting nights and then morning sunrises and all that kind of stuff. And it was really physical. It was very difficult. And then there was the added challenge for me personally, which was I had been a production executive for about 8 years. I hadn't actually line produced or produced a movie in a long time. And as much as you doubt yourself on every movie when you do it all the time, if you haven't done it in a long time, you really doubt yourself. So I was doubting myself. And then, of course, I'm thinking, and I have to do it with Sean Penn, and I have to do it with, Javier Bardem, and Charlize Theron, and Jean Reno, and all these other professionals. I'm going to look like an idiot. So I dove in. I had that moment of crisis, or week of crisis, where I thought, can I do this? Can I really do this? And I said, you know what? I know how to do this. I've done this over and over again in my career. I'll push on. And I did. And at the end of the day, it's a beautiful movie. And I think I did a pretty good job. And Sean Penn has asked me to do his next movie. I'm still thinking about I'm kidding.
Because yes, boss.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
It's that I think I'm very proud of that movie. And it's not a perfect movie, but I hope you'll see it because it's it's pretty full on.
Yeah. You mentioned about the budget that you say that we'll be surprised to know your budget. I think you'll be surprised to know our budget also.
You know what? If you do a good job, everyone will be surprised.
Okay. So any other questions?
We're having fun, right? Thank you for all your questions and your bravery. I know it's not easy. I mean, I've been to a lot of these things and sitting in the seat, and it's very daunting and embarrassing. And I promise you, just ask it. It's a good exercise for being a producer when you're not sure of something and you do it anyway. So, you know. This is therapy. This is therapy.
So, John, I have questions actually. Because of for the international film co-production, sometimes IP is very important. So, how you manage the IP? Does it belongs to somebody who got an idea, or the studios have it, or what things that you have?
There's a million different versions of that. I mean, so for instance, like when you're dealing with like DC or Marvel, that's a very established IP. You're dealing with almost like a division of a company that manages that IP, and so you have a lot of people from that department that are always looking at what you do, from the script writing phase to the casting to the costume design. You know, Superman doesn't have yellow shoes. He has, you know, red. You know, like it's so specific. Yeah, exactly. There's a whole Bible. You know, so that's a very extreme version. A lot of times you get more latitude. So if you're adapting a book, for instance, if the author is still alive, and sometimes that author will participate in the process. Sometimes they'll co-write or write the script. Sometimes there'll be a producer on the project. I remember on the Hunger Games, the writer of the books was very involved in approving the scripts and approving a lot of things, but wasn't on set every day. You know what I mean? So there was kind of an approval process, but it was a bit removed. And then, you know, there's like, you can take IP that's in the public domain, like, what's the, Joseph Campbell, the Apocalypse Now is based on it. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. Heart of Darkness, thank you very much. I've been talking too much. But Heart of Darkness, and you know, there are hundreds of different versions of that story that have been adapted, and you can change it. You can, you know, I mean, Francis Ford Coppola. That's right. And Francis Ford Coppola took it from Africa, from Congo, and applied it to the Vietnam War. So, you know, I mean, I hope that helps to answer the question. It doesn't really answer the question, but there's a million ways of working with it. And I'm sure you've had to work with. Yeah.
I think maybe what you wanted to know is if it's an original story, and let's say it goes to a big studio like Warner Brothers or Lionsgate, and you wanted to acquire or produce the film, does the big studio usually take the IP and actually
own the IP?
Buy the IP?
Buy the IP.
Well, look at Mad Max. That's a good example. I think it's a good example. There's a small Australian film that was a tiny little independent film that was produced and financed partially by Roadshow when it was a tiny little company in the 70s, I think, or early 80s, like 79, 80, something like that. Yeah, exactly. And nobody knows the actors and nothing. It was just tiny. In fact, George Miller was working as an emergency room doctor, because he's a doctor. The director, co-writer and director, was a doctor, and on the weekends he would shoot this little movie, and they would get all their friends out, and you know, stunt guys and everything else, and then they'd make the movie, and then it turned into Mad Max. So in that case, when George Miller and I don't know all the details, but I do know that George Miller was able to retain a lot of the ownership of the IP and the brand. And that means that he was able to not just control it in terms of how the movies get made and how the stories get told, but also to financially benefit from the rights. So yes, the studio definitely comes in and acquires it, but it's how you negotiate, you know, retaining that. In the case of someone like George Lucas, you know, he basically, as I understand it, and I'm sure there's, you know, a lot of speculation, but as I understand it, Fox was very concerned about the overruns in production on the first movie, and so he kept, I guess, was he financing it and giving away, he was giving away his salary in lieu of profit, participation, and for the back-end deal and for ownership of the IP. And now, you know, Lucasfilm, and sold it for $8 billion to Disney. So yeah, I mean,
I think on my side, most of the films that I produced are developed with the companies. That's actually our original IP. Of course, there were some books like the film Guy that was, I had to option the book of the diary of Suhoki. And there are, I think, 3 more that is based, you know, like Laskar Pelangi and Sang Pemimpin, The Dreamer, Adira. Those are based on a book. But I think mostly we own the IP, and I guess 2 of the most successful ones are now, the universe are getting bigger. So like What's With Love, that's a film that we produced back in 2002. We made a sequel 14 years later in 2016, which also very successful. And now the universe is, it's a drama, but it actually has a universe. So 2 of the characters of the film are now being produced by another company working with us. So they actually licensing the IP, the characters from it. Yeah.
So Mbak Mira itself still own the
Of
character?
course, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So it's just a licensing.
Just a licensing?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Cool, we can learn a lot today. So I think there's a lot new knowledge from me, especially, but I think for all of you, there are a lot of knowledge that we can learn from this session. Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Mbak Mira, for your time.
thank you.
So I think it's time to go back to the IC.
Oke, terima kasih tamu-tamu yang sudah hadir di film workshop hari ini. Terima kasih Bu Mira, terima kasih Mas Haikal, dan thank you John. We would like to give some thank you gift to all the speakers and also to the moderator. And we'd like to welcome Mr. Edwin Nazir again as the program director of ICAD to give a little.
More gifts.
Thank you.
I should have brought a bigger suit.
Thank you so much. Okay, and also Mr. Stephen also have a gift.
Very much, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
From MPA. And this is also Mr. Fauzan, the chairman of APROFI.
Profi ngasih krupon.
It's a big one.
Maybe you have going to have a picture all together.
Okay, how's that? Good? All right.